So for the final local history talk of the Crediton area for this year, 2021, it is my pleasure to introduce a speaker who has spoken in person in Crediton a number of times, but now through the marvels of modern technology and the insistence of the current situation around us, is now presenting online, which, although it means he will not be able to offer us pieces of cake at the end of the talk, as he has very kindly done in the past, he can, however, speak to you wherever you are in the world. And I know that there are people joining us from the US and from various other places. Do introduce yourselves in the chat, particularly if you're outside of the UK, and say hello. In the meantime, it is my great pleasure to introduce to this forum Dr. Paul Cleave from the University of Exeter. Paul is a food historian and generally very knowledgeable person upon the subject of all things historical and food, not just in Devon but elsewhere, but primarily focusing often on Devon traditions and cooking, and today speaking on this time of year, Christmas traditions and Christmas foods from Devon and beyond. Welcome, Paul, and over to you.
Thank you, Mark. It's great to be with you all and say in this slightly different form, but in the spirit of Christmas and the spirit of some Christmas traditions. As Mark kindly said, my sort of interests are very much focused on food and Devon and cookery and historical aspects. And this afternoon, I'd like to talk about some Christmas traditions with visual stories are woven in and around Devon and Crediton and places very, very close to us. But we will be looking, in some cases, just a little further afield to put Crediton and Devon in context. Those of you that are local and able to get to Crediton, I strongly recommend you pop into the museum and have a look at the Christmas exhibition, which takes you into a Victorian household, Victorian Crediton, and explores traditions of food that we associate with Christmas. And you'll see how our forebears enjoyed Christmas festivities. Please go and have a look at that. I shall make some reference to things that are on display in the museum as we go through the presentation. And what I'd proposed to do, thinking about these traditions and aspects of food and Christmas celebrations, was maybe just get us to think maybe where we are today and where we are just at the moment, a couple of weeks, well, 2 weeks today, Christmas Eve. So I expect many of the preparations are underway, as they have been for generations and generations at this time. That Christmas anticipation, the build up to Christmas, of course, and the food is so important in that process. So I'm sure the Christmas puddings will be boiling away, if not made and stored. Christmas cakes, mince meat, and maybe a Dundee cake and a chocolate log and mince pies on the way. So I think it's very appropriate too that our little presentation about Christmas traditions and Christmas food is coming from Crediton in Devon, and the birthplace of St. Boniface, Apostle of Germany, and really the saint who gave us the Christmas tree, which we're decorating our homes with as well. So those traditions, yes, they link us to many other countries and our widespread family. So what we're going to do then is look at sort of Christmas, some aspects of Christmas food, Christmas past, and if you like, Christmas present, and that Victorian Christmas, the Christmas we've often say enlarged invented by the Victorians and made popular and accessible to so many. Many of those traditions and the food are still with us. We think of Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol, and if you haven't read that for a while, go back and read those chapters, the descriptions of the food and the Cratchits preparing their Christmas dinner, their Christmas meal, which was so special. The goose, the pudding, the anticipation of the pudding. What would it be like? Was it overboiled? Was there enough fruit in it? Many of those anticipations we still feel today. So let's just move to the next slide. The resources I've been using, many of them, the items I'm going to talk about have come from cookery books, menus, other historical sources. Some of them have local connections. You'll see in front of you, if you look carefully towards the bottom of the screen, you can just make out the name Lady Walker. Well, that's a cookery book that belonged to Lady Walker, who lived at the Beehive in Crediton. And I'd actually spent too much time in the kitchen, but would have instructed her cook and staff the dishes that she wanted prepared from this 1920s Good Housekeeping cookery book. And we see Coping with Christmas with Fanny and Johnny Craddock. Well, you might think, well, what's the connection with Crediton there? But there is a connection, and Alison Leach, who was the editor and PA to Fanny and Johnny for many years and lived to tell the tale. Alison, for several years, lived close to Crediton at Trowbridge with her sister Rosemary. She was a wonderful raconteur, and there were very entertaining stories about her time with Fanny and Johnny. But I'll make a reference to that book a little later as we go, in a way, almost through a timeline of our Christmas traditions. We couldn't leave Mrs. Beeton out of the story, and we'll see who else we encounter as we go through the presentation. So as I said, it was very much, when I was thinking about this, thinking, well, how did the typical Devonshire family, how did they prepare their Christmas food? What were they eating? And maybe have these images of Devonshire farmhouses and cottages, very typical. This one here, by a Polish photographer, maybe around 1920, very typical of Devon cottages and farmhouses until, well within living memory. Cooking over the open fire, sometimes taking food to be baked to the local baker. And I've heard in living memory too of stories where maybe Christmas dinners were taken in towns to the baker to be roasted in the baker's oven. So we've got sort of story really of Devon and our locality. And I'd like to start really by just drawing your attention to one of the features from the exhibition at the museum, which took us back to that sort of high Victorian period, and what was known as a tradition of a gooding, or giving to those perhaps who didn't have as much as others. Practice of goodwill, of hospitality, the spirit of Christmas. And we here have an account of money being given by P.W. Cleave, Esquire of Newcomb's in Crediton. That's where the old Newcomb surgery used to be. The mansion was demolished in the 1970s. And I think all that survived somewhere, perhaps not too far away, are the granite columns surrounding the house. But we see that the parish church was tastefully decorated, and that the choir and the congregation rendered, O Zion, that bringest good tidings very creditably. So we have this spirit of goodwill and thinking about others at Christmas. And very often it's represented in gifts of food that we give today for Christmas, and thinking about others. And perhaps we can equate some of these historical references to the way we give to charity today. We think of others at Christmas time. So let's think about Christmas food. I was trying to think of something slightly different. And one of the sources I came up with is at the Dartmoor Hotel. This was at Belstone, not far from Oakhampton. The building is still there, fine double-fronted granite house, late Victorian, just as you approach the village. And the Dartmoor Hotel was established at the end of the 19th century by a Dr. Black. Dr. Black had been Chief Medical Officer for Health in Keswick, and for his own health, the benefit of his own health, he was advised to come to Devon and settled in Torquay, and found that the climate, the water, the quality of the air suited him and improved his health. And he advocated, well, Torquay as a health resort, which was very helpful to the town council in Torquay. But he had an interest in diet and improving health through diet, and in particular vegetarian cookery. So he established a vegetarian hotel in Dartmoor, and in 1908 published a manual of vegetarian cookery, and it says by George Black, MB, Edinburgh, but he's very gracious, and he credits really the recipes to Miss Densham, the cook. He says he can't take any credit for the recipes. He advocated the benefits of a vegetarian diet. I was interested to see that his Christmas dinner, I get the recipes. Should you require them, I can send you the recipes for 12 persons. And it's very typical of menus, Christmas menus of that era, that late Edwardian era. And there were other vegetarian hotels in Torquay, but I think this is something of a first, really, in that as far as hotel cookery books are featured, we're very used to them today, and celebrity chefs, there's proliferation of cookery books at this time of year especially. But I think Dr. Black's and ours from Devon is something of a first, really. So the menu, then we have a lentil soup with toasted sort of wheat flakes, granose flakes, and then that's followed by a main course of savoury raised pie. These tended to use a lot of butter beans and lentils, mock goose, sort of potatoes and onions and sage, and roasted to simulate and to look like a goose, a brown gravy, stuffed tomatoes, and tomato sauce, macaroni cheese, baked potatoes, mashed potatoes, and damson pickles, Brussels sprouts. And of course, Christmas pudding with Devonshire cream. We couldn't really leave that out, could we, in Devon? Mince pies, trifle and apple compote, cheese and biscuits, and very traditional at the time, the dessert of fresh fruit and nuts, bananas, oranges, apples, almonds and muscatels. So a different Christmas menu for that era. Probably if we looked at well, the Imperial in Torquay, would have been the leading hotel in the county at that time. Their Christmas menu would have included, no doubt, roast turkey at some point, but would have been a menu written largely in culinary French, which was the fashion at the time for menus. But the format, very typical of this Edwardian period. Dr. Black died in 1913, and the hotel sort of ceased trading as such around that time, but in the family for some time. So next time you go to Belstone, just think of that as really a trend-setting resort, moorland resort in the county. Now, moving on in time, I was thinking about Devonshire food and ingredients. And of course, as far as Christmas food is concerned, well, we're very well placed in supplying others with good food, especially at Christmas time: meat, poultry, fish, vegetables, fruit, in abundance, nuts. And here at Fortnum and Mason's, we have a wonderful Christmas catalogue, Fortnum and Mason's 217th Christmas list, as it was called then, for 1927. And it came to me complete with some order forms, but I don't think we would get the items at the prices listed in the catalogue. But I was interested to note that in the section for butter, finest Devonshire butter was 2 and 2pence a pound, and Devonshire clotted cream, no preservatives, yes, 2 and 6 for £half-pound tin, a pound tin, 4 and 6. It's interesting to see clotted cream on sale in London. It was not new. I mean, there were Devonshire sort of based dairies, a dairy in London, in fact, not far from Fortnum and Mason. And of course, sending cream by post at that time was very popular, and it would have been a very welcome Christmas gift. Just browsing through the catalogue, I noticed that there's a page of what were termed Guinea Gifts. So I'm sure we all know what a guinea was, £1 and 5 shillings, but the Guinea Gifts, which has been a lot of money in 1927, I would think we would have to say at least 60 times that. Yes, it would be a lot of money. So for a guinea gift, they were suggesting might be a Christmas cake, a £5 caddy of hill-grown Ceylon tea, box of assorted chocolates, a Christmas hamper, a prize Stilton cheese, a large bottle of peaches in brandy, a basket of choice fresh fruit, or a pair of fancy jars of stemmed ginger. The Christmas hamper, for which they're still well known at providing, they ranged in price from 21 shillings to 105 shillings, so 5 guineas, and including Christmas pudding, a choice turkey, imperial plums in brandy, a terrine of foie gras, and a choice pineapple, box of muscatels and almonds. So we might come back to Christmas shopping in a moment, but that era of the 1920s is influential in terms of food, as at this point many people were having to manage their homes with fewer servants, maybe do more of the cooking themselves. And there was a popularity in cookery books written by, well, ladies of society hostesses. And we'll look at some of these in a minute, because they do sort of link us to, there is a link to Devon, sometimes in the ingredients, sometimes the dishes they're cooking. So I've entitled this slide sort of Trends and Traditions, and I've picked out some references that people were making to Christmas food at that time. For example, first one, syllabub and Christmas pudding, something you might consider trying. And this I found in one of these society hostess cookery books, Elizabeth Hallett's hostess cookery book. And she describes preparations for Christmas and how she liked to have the traditional, the foods that people expected at Christmas. They had to be there. It was part of the tradition. And she talks of making sort of the Christmas pudding, a good dark Christmas pudding, and then suggests maybe why not serve that with a small portion of lemon syllabub. And I thought about this, and thought, yes, in Devon, yes, we want a good dollop of clotted cream and some brandy sauce maybe with it. And then tried it one Christmas, and it works. And so you have the richness of Devonshire double cream, some lemon and some brandy and sugar. But if the syllabub is frozen, it doesn't form a really solid ice cream. It's still spoonable and makes a very nice contrast to the rich, hot, spicy Christmas pudding. So sometimes looking at these books, yes, we look at them through the lens of history and food history, but you very often find there's an idea, something that we can take from them today. And another reference from the museum, the exhibition, and all the hard work that Cheryl and Helen have put into the researching the food, was a custody pudding. And a wonderful food writer who was working from the 1930s onwards and collecting recipes around the country. As she travelled and wrote, Dorothy Hartley was collecting food stories, memories, and recipes, which she later published in the 1950s. And she suggests that in Devon, one way of using up leftover Christmas pudding was to heat it with sort of custard, I suppose, maybe the leftover brandy sauce, and that it was referred to as a custardy pudding. There might be something to think about. Maybe I'd like your comments afterwards if anyone has any ideas of the way that in their family they use up or any Christmas pudding that might be left over. And then thinking about these society cookery books made me just refer to a book, again, was given to me quite by chance a few years ago, a cookery book that had been well used and recovered, Good Cookery, and Good Cookery by W.G.R. Francione, and it was the Gloucester sort of College of Domestic Science, published first edition in 1920. But the cookery school was at Harcombe House, Uplyme in Devon. And yes, it would have been an expensive cookery school. And I looked for the recipes for the Christmas recipes. And they are very, very traditional in a way. They hadn't broken away from the roast turkey or roast goose school of Christmas dinner. And almost reflect the writing of Mrs. Beeton, even the first edition of Mrs. Beeton, the roast turkey, which she advocates for Christmas, and says that that should roasted, served with a good rich gravy, some chipolata sausages, maybe bread sauce, or roast goose with sage and onion stuffing, and apple sauce. There was that link to the past, which I think we still find today, even if you look at all those glossy magazines and brochures as you go through the Co-op, Marks and Spencer's, Morrison's, Lidl's. They're all, in a way, giving us those traditional roast meals at the centre of our Christmas dinner. So we then find sometimes a reference to snapdragons. I don't know if anyone's come across these before, but a lady I interviewed several years ago and asking her about Christmas in her childhood in the late 1920s, early 1930s. And she said, "Oh yes, my dear, we always ended up with a game of snapdragons." And they were the large muscatel raisins, which were heated and flamed in brandy. And the game was to pick one out without burning your fingers. I'm sure the raisin tasted extra good, but for that at the end of the day. So we'll have a look in a moment at just one or two of these recipes, the food writers and their cookery books. And I've just included on the right a book of kitchen essays by Lady Jekyll, was sister-in-law to Gertrude Jekyll, and she wrote for the Times lovely columns, sometimes just a few recipes, but also describing how to manage all sorts of occasions and their food, whether it was shooting parties or how to manage food in your weekend cottage or picnics. And she wrote the cookery book, which was included in Queen Mary's Doll's House, and a wonderful publication which came out in 1924, which is like the story of the creation of the Doll's House, includes a copy of the cookery book. And I just included the recipe there. And the last recipe is for a festive bowl of punch for Christmas. And she suggests you take 1.5 pints of good light red wine, a gill or 1/4 pint of rum, a pint of Russian tea. You can still get that tea. It's a blend of black and she suggests green teas, a gill of lemon juice and 1/2 pint of sugar. You mix them together, just bring to the boil and serve with a ladle from a heated silver jug into long, narrow glasses. Very often very detailed about the way they like things served to their guests. So we get some interesting sort of food, well, in a way, a food story too, and food traditions as we look into these historical sources. I'd love to know more about the programs that were offered at Uplime's Cookery School. So it's on my agenda for research, but if anyone has come across any detail, I'd love to know. The cookery book is excellent. It's very well written and some very usable, interesting recipes and references to Devonshire junket, Devonshire cream, and dishes appropriate to the county. I wanted, while we're on this sort of era, this 1920s era, just to think for a moment about another wonderful description of a Christmas, slightly different Christmas dinner. This is from Mrs. Martineau, who was very talented gardener. She wrote about gardening as well as several cookery books. And Caviar to Candy is perhaps the best of the cookery books. And she describes preparing a Christmas dinner for a household where the children have left home. She suggests they may have gone off skiing, they've gone off to winter sports, they're not at home. So maybe the husband and wife or the hostess is on her own. What does she do for Christmas? Well, Mrs. Martineau suggests that she hold or organise a waif and stray Christmas dinner. And this is really to invite some, she says, young couple who are not yet asked to join others, people who are on their own, relatives who are on their own, and described in great detail the menu that might impress, well, say impress them, but give them a really sort of a treat for Christmas. Great detail about decorating the table, and then maybe starting with something she described as very chic, and that was chilled grapefruit with a small portion of tomato relish in the center of the chilled grapefruit. And this then would be followed by a soup, maybe Jerusalem artichokes, which were quite fashionable at the time, an artichoke soup or a clear soup. And then this was to be followed by deep fried sole, because she thinks that's the best fish that we had in the country. And she suggests serving that with fried bananas. So you had the grapefruit, the soup, the sole. Then we move on to the turkey with a veal stuffing. And a nice little hint from Mrs. Martineau was that instead of making chestnut stuffing, she suggests braising the chestnuts. And I've done this before, and it does work. It's very nice. Just cooking the chestnuts whole in a little stock or a very light gravy, and then serving them as an accompaniment to the turkey. A wonderful selection of vegetables and potatoes were served with this with the turkey main course. Then she has sort of discussion about what to serve really as a Christmas pudding, and she concedes that yes, probably a Christmas pudding would have to feature, but she suggested as an alternative, and again it's something that's a nice combination over Christmas, was serving open mince pies that they didn't have without a lid, but nice, very rich sort of mince meat. You put some rum and extra rum into the mince meat, and then vanilla ice cream and poached pears. So if you think about it, the warmth and the texture of the mince pie, of this sort of the vanilla ice cream and the poached pear, it is a refreshing combination. She suggests that maybe as a savoury, cheese straws, and then followed by dessert, and a detailed description of the way the dessert should be arranged, the fruits, exotic fruits, and a pomegranate, or maybe a pineapple cut in half. And that, she says, as a little festa, a little Christmas dinner. It's of its time, but again, I don't dismiss it, that there are ideas from that era that do work today, but you know, we adapt, we take some of these recipes and work with them to our taste today, because tastes in food change, they evolve. There's a lot of, you know, the fashion in food. Foods come in and out of favor, and probably someone 10, 20, 30 years ahead of us will look back at our Christmas dinner menus and catalogues and comment on what we were eating, and maybe why we were doing so. So some of you will recognize this this wonderful cafe, this restaurant, which is Della's Cafe in Exeter, in Bedford Street, on the corner of High Street and Bedford Street. It shared a site in part with but this had contained this wonderful galleried interior designed by Henry Hyams. And Della's, as well as being a venue for Christmas dinners, parties, and New Year's celebrations, and a very, very busy cafe, also was a shop. There was a retail aspect of Della's. They were very innovative in enticing customers to let Della's do the cooking for them, so you could have your meal delivered, the food delivered to your home. And one of the things they specialized in really were the Christmas puddings. So I have access to the archive from the cafe, which was sadly destroyed in the Second World War, but the manager, who retired in 1937, I think had packed the entire contents of his office into a trunk, which only came to light, the contents of which only came to light 10 or so years ago. And they revealed some of the secrets of the cafe and the food. So I've got here in front of me a copy of the memorandum from Mr. Williams Hawkes for Christmas puddings 1931. And he'd noted sort of changes in price. So a £1.25 Christmas pudding in 1930 was retailed at 1 8p. And in 1931, he'd actually reduced the price. So it was now 1 6p for this 1.25 pudding. He gives the cost of the pudding and the cost of the basin and the box and the wrapping. So it was, and the cloth, the pudding cloth. So it was very, very carefully costed. And we've got a copy of the recipe for the Christmas puddings. They made hundreds of these. So the largest you could buy was a £5 Christmas pudding. So they went up, graduated in size. Yeah, but a very nice recipe. And I noticed they used ginger, contained ginger and mace. And he let the detailed instructions that the basins had to be buttered and sprinkled with demerara sugar before the pudding mixture went in and was steamed. So yes, it was this popularity of Christmas food and buying something from, well, whether it was Fortnum and Mason's in London or if you're buying in Della's, there was a status attached to buying maybe your Christmas pudding from Della's. It would have been a very nice Christmas gift, and they had a reputation for sort of these high quality items. Interestingly, at this time, there was a promotion really to buy, buying British produce. So there was a national mark scheme which encouraged the public to support British, their farmers by buying British fruit and meat and or the suet that you might be putting into a Christmas pudding and the local ingredients, but also to buy food from the empire and to encourage the sales of food from the empire. We find recipes for the royal plum pudding. Apparently, the chef, King George V's chef, had given the recipe, and we see that all the ingredients came from Australia, from Canada, some from the United Kingdom, of course, the spices, the sugar, the rum, everything could be sourced from the empire. So it was, public were encouraged, if they didn't buy a Christmas pudding from Della's, if they made one themselves, to make it an empire Christmas pudding and support farmers and the empire, just as we're encouraged to buy local and support our farmers today. Some things yes, they're presented in the context of the time, of course, but a message is quite constant, really. You know, it's supporting local producers. Just to think about the wartime era for a moment, and see where this might take us in our story of food from Devon. And there was a connection. I found some connections here. We've presented here a copy of Ministry of Food leaflet for about 1944. Very positive, bright, so cheerful presentation, because it was considered, you know, you couldn't really ration Christmas. Yeah, there might not be as many goods in the shop, presents, and there might not have been very much food, but that spirit of Christmas, it was felt was very good for morale. And housewives were encouraged, if they were, you know, cooking at home, that they could still make a Christmas cake, they could make a Christmas pudding. We've got parsley and celery stuffing, very nice recipe actually. You could make today, but you know, you could make some form of mincemeat. You could make a form of icing using dried milk. There was a way around the coping with the shortages. And I'm sure as many of you sort of listening remember Mr. Mitchell's wonderful bakery here in Crediton, and sadly he's no longer with us, but just before he retired, he let me look at a folder that belonged to his father and his grandfather, which really contained a lot of correspondence and recipes from bakery supply companies. And amongst them were recipes from a research bakery advising bakers how to make the best use of the ingredients they were given during the Second World War, and to meet government regulations in the food that the items they could make. For example, you couldn't ice a Christmas cake, you couldn't ice any cake, but it was felt that you had to have Christmas goods. If you couldn't make them at home, you could still buy them. And so the bulletin for November 1944, you'll see why we're focusing on 1944 in a moment. You know, so advised bakers that, you know, once again it's time to consider sort of Christmas goods, and they're telling them, well, you know, that we won't be many ingredients, much in the way of the ingredients, but they were giving tried and tested recipes, so they could actually make a Christmas cake. It would have been just a fruit cake, very lightly fruited cake. It contained some sultanas or raisins and some currants. There was no mixed peel available, and some glycerine added to the fruit to moisten it. There was plenty of blackjack or gravy browning, some spices, and sometimes they used a mixture of essences, fruit essences and a butter essence to give it sort of a Christmassy flavour. So you could make a Christmas cake. One recipe suggests that it could be steamed as a pudding or baked as a cake. So, you know, you had two for the price of one there. And there was a recipe for a Yuletide fruit loaf. So really like a very lightly fruited loaf, but it was suggested it would be, you know, a nice addition for any celebration that year. So yes, Mr. Mitchell, all the bakers nationally, but here in Crediton, yeah, they were all doing their bit in supporting the war effort and keeping the spirit of Christmas alive. And I recently came across some letters which included sort of Christmas greetings for 1944 that were sent to a young airman who'd just been sent to India. So it's his first Christmas away from home, and he'd lived at Yeoford before he was joined the Air Force. He'd recently married. That's a picture of him with his wife soon after they were married. And yes, it was his first Christmas. He'd sailed on his 25th birthday to India. At this point in August, late August, September 1944, at this point, the family knew he was in India, but they didn't really know where he was. That all the letters were addressed to a conversion, conversion unit in India. But it was interesting reading the letters that he'd saved that were sent to him, because there were lots of messages, well, wishing him, yes, a happy Christmas, but telling him what was happening here. They were wondering what he was doing for Christmas. And the letter on the left says, you know, you certainly won't be skiing this Christmas, more likely to be having a bathe. And they didn't really know what he would be doing, how he'd be celebrating sort of Christmas. But one of the letters in late October, sort of November of 1944, from his wife's youngest cousin, says, I suppose excuse me, I'll just read this. We shall soon be enjoying Christmas, which will very likely be a better one than last year. We heard on the wireless, we're going to have more of everything in the food line. And then she says, we were studying India in our geography book at school, which is very interesting now that you're there. She goes on to describe the school play. This is at Yeoford School, the Pied Piper of Hamelin, and she was the crier. And she talks about the evacuee and the carol singing, and also just comments that acorns are very plentiful now. There are hundreds of them all around the house. They were on a farm at Enterlake, just past Yeoford. The gander likes them very much and cracks them like hazelnuts and then swallows the pieces. And we begin to build up a picture of sort of Christmas, the anticipation of Christmas at that time. They talk about in some of the letters about the Christmas food, and his wife, Frida, on one of the letter of December the 17th, said that she'd been busy this morning making a Christmas cake, and she thought it smelled quite good because she'd added a good dose of port to the mixture. And it might seem sort of quite late, December the 17th, to make the Christmas cake, but of course there weren't the ingredients to add to make it a very rich cake that would keep very long. The next letter from Frida's cousin Betty included a paper clipping. Now, if you sent a paper, anything added to a letter, it had to go surface mail. It couldn't go by these sort of airmail letters. But the writing is so small, I just got to use a glass to read it. But she must have cut this from the cutting from the Western Times, seems to be a paper that they refer to in the letters. And she says, the cutting reads, "There's no shortage of mistletoe in Germany," says an article, but who wants to kiss Hitler under it? And the next part is very typical of the time, in that there's a letter written to children, supposedly that, well, that Christmas is coming, even if we think it's a long time in coming this year. And really advising children that there wouldn't be as many toys this year, and it wouldn't be possible for Santa to make the journey as he had done in previous years. So we get a picture really of the Christmas celebrations. They tell us about carol singing, the youth club in Yeoford, were organising carol singing to raise money for the Red Cross, to send presents and gifts to all the soldiers from the area that were fighting. And apparently there were 34 servicemen in the area. There was a pantomime in Exeter. Many of the Christmas traditions continued, and maybe that, you know, the references to food and making the best of a situation. So we're coming more towards a conclusion. Yes, it's been very interesting. It always is to share this research with you, going back over some of the much older material, but also bringing things up to date. So here, I mean, these are some of the publications this year I've collected, and sometimes, yeah, the messages are very similar. Those special foods, something different for Christmas, and that preparation. I mean, we've had the Christmas programs and sort of Kirsty's Homemade Christmas and Jamie's, you know, sort of Christmas programs on TV and the media today, maybe in another form, but in some ways the message is much the same as those in Fortnum and Mason's catalogue. And Coping with Christmas, publication 1968 with Fanny and Johnny Craddock. And that's a little quote here, it's so small. And they published a book, it was Coping with Christmas, and she gave you almost a step-by-step countdown to Christmas, and everything you should be doing from January through to December the 25th, whether you had a couple of days off afterwards, when we get to read. But she suggests that let us not delude ourselves. If some preparations are not made in advance, Christmas can be sheer hell for the average wife and mum, especially if she is in for a plague of relations as well as everything else. So I think that's very much the vein of Fanny Craddock's thinking, but that planning for Christmas. And yes, we do that. We plan, we look forward to Christmas. And the food, I think, it is central. It's very much linked to that tradition. And I think we bring that from one generation to another. We pass that on. As we're preparing today, I'm sure many of us are thinking of things that our parents and their parents had at Christmas. We bring out some of the same decorations. We have some of the same foods. We always had that. It wouldn't be Christmas without some of these items. But yes, we look for something new. It evolves. But that Christmas message, yeah, and that Christmas theme of food is enduring. So I'm going to, I think, finish my presentation there, and then it would be nice if anyone's any comments, any of your memories to share. Do so, and anything that you find, those Christmas stories, sometimes these Christmas cards, things that turn up. It's all part of that social history, and that history, that folklore, in a way, that evolving tradition of Christmas celebrations and sharing. So I'm going to stop sharing now.
Excellent. Thank you, Paul. I'll just give you half a minute to catch your breath. I'm going to reset the permissions for this room so that people can, if they wish to, turn on their cameras or microphone or whatever. In the meantime, whilst I'm doing that, just to beg your indulgence in the audience for just a second. I'm just popping into the chat window the email address for Crediton Library. For those watching this back later, it's crediton.library@librariesunlimited.org.uk. This is the end of the 2021 season of talks. We will be back in January with some more of these talks, but it is really useful to have feedback from people, particularly as we have so many overseas people in the audience today. If you've been to one of these talks or many and enjoyed them, or have any comments, good, bad or indifferent, that you'd like to pass to us, please do so via that email address, if you would. It's really useful for us to be able to plan ahead in the future and do more of this sort of thing if that is what people want. I'm also just going to pop in there a website address, which I'm going to be really lazy and copy from another window. These talks are all provided completely free of charge, but if you would like to support Libraries Unlimited, which is the charity which looks after libraries in Devon, there is just a little support link there, librariesunlimited.org.uk/support-us, where you can make a donation to the charity if you wish to do so. It is by no means obligatory. You should now have permission, if you wish to do so, to turn on your camera and join us in the room. Just for your benefit, Paul, I'll just run through and let you know that there are people in the audience who have sent greetings from California, from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Ontario, Canada, Fayetteville, NC, Virginia, Minneapolis, Minnesota, Arlington, VA, and Nova Scotia, amongst many other places. So we have an international audience for this talk, which is wonderful. There are a couple of comments and questions in the chat, which I'll run through first before I pass over to other people who might want to ask things. Somebody noted that 1.5 pounds of sugar was quite a lot of sugar to put into a recipe. Half a pound of sugar in the Christmas punch, I think it was, and 1 pound of sugar in whatever the recipe was on the top of that slide. It was quite a lot of sugar.
Yeah.
On that slide, or around about that time as well, there was a comment that said, were you suggesting at one point that servants and dependents ate together at Christmas?
I wasn't suggesting that, but I know that I've had sort of first-hand recollections where servants, maybe they may have in some households, but one in particular, which I think was very typical of many upper middle class families, was that the servants were provided with a very nice Christmas dinner. And the reference in particular, I know, was that for the household, the turkey came from their estate in Wiltshire. And for the staff, a turkey was sent from Lipton's. Yeah, but yes, there were. I think it would be interesting. You know, there must be all sorts of recollections, and maybe giving staff time off. I've come across many sort of accounts and stories where staff were maybe they were given a time later in the day for their celebrations, and I've read of the Duke and Duchess of Windsor who entertained their staff on Christmas Day. They were sort of host and hostess. So yeah, it's an interesting point. I'm sure there are many different sort of stories to be told there.
Yes, absolutely. I'm sure. There's a question from Heather here. Were there special Christmas cookies or biscuits?
In particularly here, so UK, and it would have been the same really in Devon. We find that, and then the Fortnum and Mason catalogues and books, it was shortbread, either petticoat tails or sort of finer, thinner shortbreads, or blocks of shortbread, tins of shortbread. That seems to be the predominant biscuit for gifts and associated with Christmas. I mean, I can't go through the catalogue now, but that 1927 catalogue from Fortnum and Mason's lists all sorts of fancy biscuits. And again, sort of anecdotally, people have made reference to sort of giving this sort of tins of fancy biscuits as gifts for Christmas. And it may have been from, sort of grocer to certain sort of customers. You will be given a tin of biscuits as a gift to the customers. So yeah, but I think shortbread in particular, this one, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Cheryl asks, what were merry-go-rounds? They were mentioned in one of your lists.
Oh, I think on the wartime type of biscuit. I'd have to go back to the slide, but yeah, type of biscuit, I think, Cheryl.
Okay, thank you. There was a question about rationing. Did they have sugar and flour during the rationing? The cookie recipes on the index in the last cookbook mentioned sugar and flour. I think they had a little, didn't they?
But they did, and it was my mother who made the Christmas cake. And yes, they had sugar, and the government ensured that supplies of, well, as they were, any sort of fruit and ingredients for Christmas food was made available. So it was either using the points system of the rationing program, or the stock of sugar that you had built up. But there would have been, yes, sugar and not very much dried fruit available, or great variety, but you were able to make a passable cake. Actually, some of the Ministry of Food recipes were very clever.
Okay, thank you. A couple more in the chat, and then I'll move to people who might want to ask their own questions. These are both from Isabel. The first one: does Dr. Black say what he used in place of suet in his recipes?
No, I think it's interesting. When I've been going through the book, it's some of the ingredients they use a type of fat called, there was nutter. There were alternatives to animal suet, so they would have been able to use other forms of fat. But in his book, there means liberal use of milk and eggs and cream and cheese. I think it's not as strict. I mean, his vegetarian diet is a different regime to. There was a Dr. Oldfield in Paynton at the same time. Today we would say it was more of a vegan program, but Dr. Black, I think, was of that school of building people up with plenty of dairy produce.
Okay, thank you. And Isabel's other question was, I noticed that both your interesting letters from 1944 and Newcombe House Gooding mention the Cleave family. I wonder if they are your forebears.
The letters are, yes. Yeah.
But not the Newcombe
not that
House
I know
connection.
of. No, I'd have that's another some more research to do. Yeah.
Maybe, you never know. You never know.
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. That wraps up the chat questions. There is a hand up in the room from the Zoom account, which is labelled Gloria.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I'm not Gloria, of course. I'm David Nation. I'm chair of
David.
History and Museum Society, and I'm sitting here in Crediton Museum actually with Mike Brett, who's our technical whiz kid, who has joined me here to do a dummy run of Zooming these talks in future from the museum, so that those who don't want to Zoom from home locally, but want to join with others in witnessing any of our talks, can hopefully do so from Crediton Museum, with effect from the January talk. January, February and March are planned so far, and you can see the details for those on the creditonhistory.org.uk website. So first of all, I want to say thanks very much to Paul, one of our members here in Crediton History Society, for this talk. I wasn't quite sure what to expect, really. I enjoy eating food, but I'm not very good at preparing it. So I was fascinated by it, actually. It's amazing how much there is to learn about the subject beyond what's on the sort of TV and cookery programs. So thanks very much for that. Cheryl and Helena have been mentioned, and Paul has contributed to the exhibition that Cheryl and Helena have put on in Crediton Museum at the moment, with fascinating imitation food, I think largely produced by Colin, Helen's husband, who's a baker by profession as well. So I just wanted to say thanks, Paul, for your talk, to let people know that check our website for the future Zooming, which Mike Brett has made possible here at the museum from starting in January. And we look forward to seeing people at our future talks, and those who want to come to the museum to see them sort of live. I struggle with the technology, as perhaps many of us do, but guided by Mike, all things seem to be possible. And it's great to have so many participants from overseas, in particular the USA, I think. So thanks very much, Paul.
Well, thank you, David. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, David. It's good to know that a blended approach next year will be good. And also, yes, for our guests from overseas, you will still be able to attend future talks in this manner if you wish to do so. I will just quickly run through actually what's coming up after Christmas. In January, there is a talk on the story of the Coppell Stone. That is a large stone monument not too far away from Crediton. In February, there is a talk on Breton woodworkers in early Tudor Devon. And then after that, the third presentation is on cinemas in Devon. That is in March. So those are the topics that are coming up after Christmas. Do follow the Crediton Library Eventbrite page, the page that you booked this ticket on, if you want notifications automatically when tickets become available for future talks for your consideration. Would anybody else like to ask Paul a question before we wrap this session up? Please indicate so in the chat window, or by waving furiously at the screen, or just yelling at us, or whatever, if you do. Okay, I think we are probably done there. So yes, thank you on behalf of the library as well, Paul, for another fascinating talk, as always.
It's a pleasure.
And everybody else in the room, please do show your appreciation in the chat window, or however you wish to do so, to Dr. Paul Cleave for that wonderful talk on Christmas food and traditions.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you. Various amounts of gratitude in different ways there from
very kind. Thank you.
From people all over the place. Excellent. Lovely. Thank you all so much for joining us. Do go off now and begin cooking for your Christmas meal. You've got inspiration plenty there from Paul. And in fact, do if you want any recipes from Paul, I'm sure he's got plenty that he could give us to send out. Do drop the library an email and tell us what you would like to cook, and we'll see if we can't find you a decent recipe for it.
Okay.
All right, lovely. Thank you all very much for joining us. Do have a wonderful and above all safe Christmas, and we shall look forward to seeing you all again in the new year. Thank you.
Please meeting, right?
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye.